There is a moment in this episode that stops you cold. Not because of what the instruments detected, not because of the aerial anomalies, or the radiation spikes, or the sensor data that continues to defy explanation. What stops you is simpler than that, and far more unsettling. Travis Taylor walked away. If you followed the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch for any amount of time, you understand why that sentence carries weight. Travis Taylor is not a reality television personality reacting to shadows and strange sounds. He is an astrophysicist, a man who has spent his professional life inside institutions that do not tolerate the unexplained. They demand it be measured, tested, replicated, and categorized. He has worked with agencies that see the universe as a problem to be solved. He is, by every professional definition, the rational anchor of this investigation. The man who always had a framework. The man who always had a next step. This episode is titled Why Dr. Travis Taylor Suddenly Walked Away, and what happened next, no one expected. And what makes that title remarkable is not the departure itself. It's the context surrounding it. Because in the same episode that Taylor stepped back, a Navajo shaman performs a sacred ritual at Homestead 2, the most instrumentally active, most psychologically unsettling location on the entire property. A collision between ancient ceremonial knowledge and some of the most sophisticated monitoring equipment ever deployed on private land in North America. Two completely different systems for understanding reality, occupying the same ground. At the same time, the question the episode raises, and never fully answers, is this. What does it take to make a physicist who has spent years chasing this data decide, in the middle of that chase, that he needs to stop? By the end of this episode, the team wouldn't just question the ranch. They'd question themselves. And so will you. To understand why what happens in this episode matters, you need to understand where it happens. Homestead 2 is not simply another location on a large piece of Utah ranch land. For anyone who has tracked this investigation across multiple seasons, it occupies a different category from the rest of the property. The anomalies recorded here are not sporadic. They are concentrated, patterned, and in several documented cases, they have produced measurable physiological effects on the people standing inside them. Equipment has failed here in ways the team has not been able to attribute to terrain, interference, or mechanical fault. Aerial phenomena have been documented above this site with a frequency that exceeds what has been recorded elsewhere on the property. In previous seasons, team members reported physical sensations, pressure, disorientation, and instinct to leave that they noted on camera but did not explain. The scientific record at Homestead 2, built across years of instrumented investigation, suggests that something about this location responds differently. Not occasionally. Consistently. When the decision was made to bring the Navajo shaman here, to this site, specifically, that choice was not arbitrary. The team understood what the data at Homestead 2 had been pointing toward. They understood the history of this ground, and they chose it anyway. That decision tells you something about where this investigation had arrived by season 7. It tells you that the conventional methodology had reached a point where something different was being considered. Something that sat outside the standard investigative playbook. The instruments were set up. The monitoring stations were active. The baseline readings were logged. And then something ancient walked into the frame. His arrival changes the atmosphere of the episode immediately. The Navajo shaman who comes to Skinwalker Ranch in this episode is not a television prop. He is a practitioner of a ceremonial tradition that predates the ranch, predates the state of Utah, and predates every scientific instrument the team has deployed on this property by centuries. He represents a framework for understanding the world that was not constructed in a laboratory. It was built through observation, transmission, and direct encounter across generations, a knowledge system that has its own internal logic, its own vocabulary, and its own understanding of what inhabits certain kinds of land. For the first time in the show's history, those two systems are now sharing the same physical space. Watch the team in the moments before the ritual begins. The skeptics, and there are always skeptics, go quiet. Not dismissive. Not performatively open-minded. Quiet in the way that people go quiet when something they cannot immediately categorize is standing in front of them. Travis Taylor's expression carries the particular focus of a scientist who has encountered a variable he does not have a prior experiment for. Before the ritual begins, the shaman communicates what he senses about the land. What he describes does not contradict the scientific data. It translates it. He speaks of presence, of intelligence, of something that has been aware of the investigation long before the investigation became aware of it. He offers a warning that the production crew notes carefully. He does not frame what he is about to do as performance. He frames it as contact. This is the ideological collision that drives everything that follows. The astrophysicist and the ceremonial practitioner are not opposing each other. They are, it turns out, describing the same thing with entirely different languages and entirely different tools. And both languages, it seems, are being heard. The monitoring equipment at Homestead 2 does not wait for the ritual to conclude before it starts responding. What the data captures during the ceremony is not a single anomalous reading that can be isolated and examined in a vacuum. It is a sequence. Electromagnetic fluctuations that begin before the ceremony reaches its focal point. Radiation levels that climb incrementally and then stabilize at a value the instruments have not recorded at this location before. GPS signal disruptions that occur without any obvious external cause. And in at least one documented instance, a deviation in baseline sensor readings that the team cannot attribute to equipment error, atmospheric interference, or human proximity. The timing is what matters here. In a properly controlled investigation, correlation is not causation. The team knows this. But when instrument responses begin aligning with specific moments in the ceremony, with the particular intervals and transitions of a ritual the monitoring equipment was not designed to detect, the correlation becomes harder to dismiss as coincidence. Travis Taylor's real-time reactions during this data sequence are worth watching carefully. He is looking at the readings. He is processing them against everything he knows. You can see the analytical machinery working. And you can also see, in the moments between his responses, something that looks less like analysis and more like recalibration. Like a man who is updating a model he built years ago and finding that the new data does not fit. The first hard question this episode asks is quiet, but it lands. Was the ritual causing the phenomena? Or had the phenomena always been present, and the ritual was simply the first thing the ranch had ever encountered that it chose to respond to? This is the section of the episode that the rest of the season will be measured against. Reconstruct the sequence. The ritual is active. The instruments are logging deviations. The shaman is engaged in the ceremony in a way that the production cameras are capturing but not fully contextualizing. And then something happens. A specific moment, a specific reading, a specific intersection of what the equipment detects and what is observable in the environment, and Travis Taylor steps back. Not dramatically. That's the thing that makes it significant. There is no theatrical reaction, no declaration. What there is instead is a stillness, and then a decision to create distance. The behavior of a man who has reached a threshold and made a quiet, deliberate choice to stop crossing it. In the context of this show, that matters enormously. Travis Taylor is not a participant who can be rattled by atmosphere. He has stood in the middle of this property through phenomena that would have ended other investigations. He has looked at instrument data that no one in mainstream science would publish without a career risk and taken it seriously, repeatedly, on record. He is not easily moved. What was detected on the instruments at the precise moment he stepped back is something the episode presents but does not explain. The team notes it. Taylor notes it. And then the conversation moves on in the way that conversations on this show sometimes move on. Not because the subject is closed, but because it has become too large to address in real time. The question that every informed viewer carries out of this moment is the same. Travis Taylor has connections to institutions and programs that operate under non-disclosure frameworks. He understands, better than most people on this property, what the data they have collected actually implies. When a man with that background, standing in front of that data, in that location, makes the quiet choice to step back, what exactly did he see? When the ceremony concludes, the shaman speaks. What he describes is not vague. It is not the kind of spiritual language that allows for comfortable ambiguity. He identifies, in specific terms drawn from Navajo cosmological tradition, what he encountered during the ritual, what he says the ranch contains, what he believes has been present here long before Brandon Fugel purchased the property, long before the Sherman family named what they experienced and before Nid set up the first instruments. He is describing something that, within his framework, has identity, intention, awareness. Now compare that to the instrumented record. The electromagnetic baselines that shift in response to human presence and intent. The aerial phenomena that appear to track investigation teams across the property. The signals that have, on multiple occasions, seemed to respond to direct communication attempts. The team has documented, across years, the behavioral signatures of something that is not passive. Something that is not simply a natural phenomenon occurring independently of the people measuring it. The shaman's description and the scientific data are not in conflict. They are in agreement. Watch the faces of the team members who have spent years dismissing frameworks that weren't built in a physics department. Watch the particular silence that follows when someone who has never seen their instrument data describes what that data implies, accurately, through a completely different epistemic tradition. The shaman did not just perform a ceremony that night. He offered a translation. And for the first time in a long time, some members of the team looked like they understood it. There is a pattern that runs through this show, and this episode brings it into sharper focus than most. Trained, skeptical, professionally credentialed people who selected careers specifically because those careers reward rigor and resist the unverified, are repeatedly encountering something at this ranch that their training was not designed to process. And the longer the exposure continues, the more visible the psychological effects become. This is documented, not just in the behavior of the Skinwalker Ranch team, but in the broader literature on prolonged engagement with genuinely unexplained phenomena. The human cognitive system is built to resolve, to categorize, to close the loop. When a loop cannot be closed, when the data keeps arriving and the framework keeps failing to contain it, the psychological cost accumulates. What this episode shows, across the team's collective reactions to the ritual and its aftermath, is not fear. It is something more specific and more troubling. It is the expression of people whose conceptual architecture is being tested at its load-bearing points. The ranch does something to the people who investigate it. Whether that something is simply the weight of sustained exposure to the genuinely inexplicable, or whether it involves a more direct form of influence, that question sits at the edge of what the show has ever been willing to ask directly. This episode gets closer to asking it than most. In the midst of everything that surrounds the ritual, the instrument data, Taylor's response, the shaman's debrief, there is an aerial event in this episode that receives less attention than it should. Something is captured. Visual confirmation from the cameras, corroborated by at least one instrumented reading, of an object or phenomenon in the airspace above Homestead 2 during the investigation window. The team acknowledges it. It is noted in real time. And then the narrative moves forward, and the full analysis that this kind of detection would normally generate does not follow. This is not an editing accident. The production team at Skinwalker Ranch does not miss anomalous aerial events. They are specifically equipped to detect and document them, which means the decision not to linger on this particular occurrence was made deliberately. The question is why. Cross-referenced against similar detections in previous seasons, this event fits a pattern. Aerial phenomena at this property have shown a tendency to appear during moments of heightened activity or focused investigation, as if the investigation itself is a trigger. What was recorded above Homestead 2 during the ritual adds one more data point to that pattern. The attentive viewer will notice it. The show does not invite them to examine it further, and that gap between what is shown and what is explored is itself a form of information. There is a layer to this show that long-term viewers have learned to read. Skinwalker Ranch is not simply a television production. It is an investigation being conducted on property owned by a man with documented connections to aerospace and national security adjacent conversations. The lead scientist is a former Department of Defense consultant whose work intersects with programs that operated, for years, under classification frameworks. When Brandon Fugel has spoken publicly about what the ranch represents and what the data implies, he has been careful, deliberate. There are things he approaches directly and things he circles without landing. Travis Taylor operates in that same space. His on-camera reactions across the series are those of a man who understands the implications of the data more fully than the show ever directly states. When he steps back from an active investigation, the explanation he offers on camera is not necessarily the complete explanation. This is not a criticism of the production. It is an acknowledgement of the environment these people are operating in. There are frameworks, legal, institutional, professional, that govern what can be said on a streaming platform about the nature of phenomena that may intersect with classified research areas. Walking away can mean many things in that context. It can mean personal overwhelm. It can mean a boundary that was always present, just never encountered before. It can mean that something was recorded that required a conversation that does not happen on camera. The show cannot tell you which of those it is, but the question is worth carrying. The episode does not end with a resolution. That is, by now, a recognizable feature of how this investigation documents itself. But what makes the aftermath of this particular episode different is not the absence of answers. It's the quality of the silence that follows. After the ritual. After Taylor's departure from the active investigation space. After the shaman's debrief has been absorbed by a team that is visibly still processing it. After the aerial anomaly has been noted and the instrument logs have been closed for the night. What happens next is not a return to standard operating procedure. Something has shifted in how the team engages with what they are doing here. It is visible in the way they speak about the ranch in the episode's closing sequences. The careful, almost methodical certainty that has characterized Taylor's on-camera analysis across previous seasons is replaced by something quieter and less resolved. The kind of tone that appears in people who have updated a fundamental assumption and haven't yet decided what to replace it with. The audience reaction to this episode was measurably different from the reception of standard investigation episodes. Viewers who had watched the series for years noted it as a turning point, not because it provided a definitive revelation, but because it felt like the investigation had crossed into territory from which there was no straightforward return. This episode opened something, and the series, for better or worse, cannot now close it. Here is what this episode actually establishes when you hold the full record of it together. It is not, at its core, about what the instruments detected or what the aerial cameras captured. Those things matter, and the data points are real. But the deeper argument this episode is making, the one that runs beneath the sensor readings and the anomaly logs, is about the limits of the tools we have built to understand reality. Travis Taylor represents the most disciplined version of the Western scientific tradition that this investigation has been able to deploy. Everything measurable, measured. Everything testable, tested. Every claim anchored to a repeatable, verifiable methodology. That tradition has produced extraordinary knowledge about the nature of the universe. It has taken us off this planet and mapped the deep structure of matter itself. And at Skinwalker Ranch, it keeps running into a wall. The Navajo shaman represents something that Western epistemology has spent centuries categorizing as pre-scientific, meaning, by implication, superseded. A way of knowing the world that the modern academic framework views as mythology with interesting cultural dimensions. A tradition to be studied, not consulted. And yet, what the shaman described at Homestead 2 aligned with what the instruments recorded. His framework did not contradict the data. It contextualized it in ways that the scientific methodology, for all its precision, had not managed to do. What the ranch may be revealing, across years of documented investigation, is not simply that strange things happen on this land. It may be revealing something about the map we have been using to navigate reality itself, and the significant, uncomfortable possibility that the map has edges we haven't been willing to mark. Travis Taylor walked away from Homestead 2 that night. The data he left behind did not. And somewhere in the space between what he saw and what he said, in the gap between the recorded signal and the acknowledged explanation, The real investigation of Skinwalker Ranch continues. Quietly, without resolution. Exactly as it always has.